Today we are doing a full review on the Kawasaki Z900RS. Now, just recently on the channel we had the standard Kawasaki Z900, but we exchanged that with Kawasaki to get our hands on this RS model, which is the retro version of that bike. So let's dig into everything about it. Powering this beast is a 948cc inline four-cylinder. So actually, the name Z900 is underselling it a little bit. And it's nice to have an inline four in a retro motorcycle like this because a lot of these classic bikes, including the Z1 that this is meant to replicate, had those inline four-cylinder engines. This one is rated at 110 horsepower and 73 pound-feet of torque, which is actually down a good bit from the standard Z900. So the normal Z900 is rated at 125 horsepower at 9,500 RPM. This is 110 at 8,500 RPM. So the peak power is at a lower RPM, but the peak power is not nearly as much. Let's get on the throttle a little bit here on the Kawi. Wow. So it's, like I mentioned, down on power compared to the standard Z900, but it doesn't really feel like it's down on power that much. I mean, 110 horsepower is still a solid amount, and this is a decently torquey engine too. Now, this bike weighs about 472 pounds, so it's definitely a little bit on the heavier side, but once you get it moving, really doesn't feel that heavy, because 73 pound-feet of torque. I mean, even if I'm up here in fourth gear, if I twist the throttle, I've got plenty enough torque to get this bike motivated. And then once you get into that top end, yeah, it really screams. I bet with an aftermarket pipe, it would sound phenomenal, even from the factory. That's a good noise, and it makes it fun to twist the throttle. But I'd say there's enough torque here right off the crack that you don't necessarily have to wring it out all the time if you don't want to. You could hang out and lower RPM if you're in a more commuter type setting. This being a retro naked bike, it has styling that is meant to mimic the classic and iconic Kawasaki Z1. So you have a round headlight up front, you have some chrome, which is getting to be more and more unusual on motorcycles. You have these gorgeous four pipes that collect into one, come up along the side of the bike, and a good number of these elements actually look a lot like the Z1 back in the day, especially the tank and this tail section where the tail light is, and even this thick padded seat. This is a really comfortable seat, but it also still gives it that retro style. What's not so retro on this motorcycle is the very obvious radiator up front. Of course, this is a liquid-cooled inline four-cylinder. There's no getting around having that radiator there, and at least they did frame it in some nice metal accents, but this big block of radiator, it kind of gives away the fact that this is trying to be retro and it's not really retro. Wow. That really doesn't get old. Now, in terms of comfort on this motorcycle, there's obviously no wind protection here. You can get a cafe version of this bike that gives you a little cowl around the headlight, but it's not going to give you much wind protection either. Not that you would expect it really from a naked bike to have massive amounts of wind protection. And in terms of the suspension, obviously it's stiff. I mean, this is not a slow motorcycle, and so you want to have relatively stiff suspension, but it's not overly crashy. And really what makes up for a lot of it is this seat. Oh man, this seat is unbelievably comfortable. It gives you a lot of cushion, so even where the bike is on the more aggressive side, this seat makes up for a lot of that. And the other thing too is that this riding position is really, really upright. It's really comfortable. I've got zero pressure on my lower back right now. I'm sitting as upright as I would be on a dirt bike, and it makes this a bike that I could ride this any distance. I could ride this all day. So if you want a motorcycle to not only rip up some canyons on and carve around, but also to be able to cruise around town like this, get to work, go pick up some food, do whatever. You could ride this bike in really pretty much every scenario.
Now, in keeping with that old school theme, you have 2 analog gauges, but you've also got a screen in the center. It's a small screen, gives you a gear position indicator, tells you where your fuel tank, your temp is. It's got a trip computer, a clock, so some essential information there. But for the most part, you're going to spend the majority of your time looking at these 2 big analog gauges. This standard Z900RS has a set of inverted forks with some adjustability and Kawasaki branded dual disc brakes in the front. However, around the rear, you have a monoshock and a Nissan branded brake, and that monoshock in the rear also has some adjustability. But if you want the best potential suspension on the Z900RS, there is an SE model that gets you an Öhlins rear shock and Brembo branded front brakes.
So all in all, there's a lot of things about this motorcycle that I like, and only a few things that I don't. So from where I'm sitting right now, this screen in between my analog gauges is hard to read with my polarized sunglasses on. This is not far from the only motorcycle that's happened to me on, but it is something worth noting. If you usually wear polarized sunglasses, this screen might not be super easy to read. And then, I don't know, other than that, there's not really a lot about this motorcycle that I dislike after having ridden it for a day. So admittedly, haven't spent tons of time on it, but in general, I like this motorcycle a lot, even more than I thought I would, because in our last video, I just rode the Yamaha XSR 900, and I fully expected that I was going to like that bike more than this one. And I gotta be honest, personally, after riding both, I like the Z900 better, because this is a motorcycle that just suits my riding style more. It's got enough torque that I don't feel like I have to wring it out all the time, whereas that XSR just felt like it was begging to be wrung out all the time, and I know I would get into trouble if I spent a lot of time on that bike. This is a bike that I could see myself riding a bunch and enjoying twisting the throttle and wringing it out when it's the right time to do so, and then being perfectly happy just hanging out with the torque at the bottom end of this bike when I'm around town like this and I don't want to be wrung out in second gear going nearly 90 miles an hour. So it's just a more approachable bike in my mind. I think it's more suitable for all conditions. If you want to ride really hard all the time, I think the XSR makes more sense. But man, I'm enjoying this Kawi a lot, and I would love to hear what it sounds like with a more open pipe. I think this is a really great motorcycle, and it makes me miss riding my own 70s inline 4-cylinder, my old CB.
This standard Z900RS MSRP's at $11,949, and that's compared to $9,400 minimum MSRP on the regular Z900. So it is less power and it's more expensive, but for me personally, I would still make that leap, because I think that the styling on this is a really great mix of being both modern but throwing back a lot to the old school. And if you want to get the SE model that has that Öhlins rear suspension and the Brembo front brakes, that is $13,449 MSRP. So it depends all on how much you want to spend. But I will say that SE model with the yellow ball styling is really nice to look at. So that's it for this motorcycle. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. And coming up very soon, we are going to compare this bike against the Yamaha XSR 900. So keep your eyes peeled, and we'll see you in the next video.